And just like that, week 4 of the NFL season is here. Some of us are 3-0, some of us are 0-3, and some of us are iterations in between. But Ed, we shall get started as we always do on our preview show with some starts of the week. And I've got 6 tapey options for you this week. Firstly, Geno Smith. I think our first mention of Geno during the season so far, really. He's averaging 280 passing yards per game, so he's been doing fairly steady, and the Bears have given up the 6th most passing yards in the NFL. So Geno, a time where we still might be managing our QB shortages in places, could be a good pick. So it's also turned to Caleb Williams, who still isn't widely rostered. Well, he's widely rostered, not widely started. He's at least 18 points in all 3 of his outings. He's got a really safe fantasy floor at the moment with a legitimate QB1 upside. I think you said in a previous show that it was doing consistently well for fantasy, even though it wasn't quite looking like it on the field. But it all came together against the Cowboys, didn't it, really? That should remain the case on Sunday against the Raiders, who, let's not forget, Marcus Mariota just picked apart for the Commanders. So I reckon Caleb Williams could probably do the same. I think I mentioned Ricky Pearsall about 5 times a show during the offseason. We've not spoken about him too much since, but he was Matt Jones's clear go-to guy, catching 8 of 11 targets for 117 yards in week 3. Still not found the end zone, but this could be the week with San Francisco's offense still banged up. It could be the Ricky Pearsall show. Let's be honest, against a subpar Jaguars secondary, who are bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to receivers. So Ricky Pearsall should be a good shout this week. We've gone back and forth on Nick Chubb, whether it's a start, whether it's a sit. This week feels like a start week for me. He hasn't found a lot of running room behind Houston's shaky offensive line yet, but a good chance to score in week 4 against Tennessee. The Titans have allowed a league-high 5 rushing touchdowns to running backs, while also allowing the 3rd most points per game in the league, 27.27 points. Keenan Allen, Ed, can you please find a reason why the current wide receiver 6 is only started in 50% of leagues and currently available still in 17%? Does that feel as much of an anomaly to you as it does to me?
It does. That's very surprising. I assume that will change this weekend.
He's been consistently good for 60 yards and a touchdown every week so far. I expect more of the same against the Giants, who are giving it the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers so far through 3 weeks. Fine, I'm going to keep this one brief. Why should we start the Broncos defense this week? They've got the Bengals. Cool. Over to you, Ed. Any of those that you disagree with as being good starts this week, or any of those that you're definitely plugging in?
I'm all in on both those quarterbacks this week. Yeah, both good shouts. We've spoken about Caleb Williams before, haven't we? I'm still I'd still be dubious of starting Nick Chubb. I've got him in a couple of leagues. He's averaging probably about 10, 11 carries per game. He had 1 touchdown against the Bucs, but I'm just not really sure if he's going to even get me that flex value. I know what you're saying about the Titans, but that Texans O-line really isn't great. So out of the ones you've suggested, he'd probably be the one I'm most reticent about. But I do see a path to him having a better week this week.
Should we have a look at some players that we're not quite so sure on? So my sits of the week this week, I'm going a little bit off brand. I'm suggesting a few players that we've been very confident on for much of the season so far.
I mean, how dare you? How dare you suggest that Danny Dimes should be sacked? That is just sacrilege.
I mean, I am one of the early members of the Danny Dimes fan club, as we all know. He leads the NFL with a 2.22% sack rate. Why do I start telling you a positive stat? Because week 4 opponent, the Rams, are tied for the NFL lead with 12 sacks. This is purely Rams defense focused and pass rush focused rather than being any slight on Danny Dimes. This is probably a week to look elsewhere if you can. Now, Danny Dimes may well be your wonderful fallback option because you had Joe Burrow or you had Mac Jones and you had to pivot. I've got a league where Daniel Jones was the only quarterback I could find to plug in last week, so I was without Burrow. I will be starting him this week. If I could, I'd try to avoid it, I think. Dak Prescott is often a start for us, but this week, Green Bay, and why Green Bay suffered that mind-boggling loss to the Browns last week. Micah Parsons and co, they held up their side of the bargain. They still held Cleveland to 13 points. And I just think, once again, this is a week where you might not have other options, but if you do, you could pivot. I've got a dynasty league where I've got Justin Herbert and Dak, and I've flipped between both of them over the season so far. This will be definitely a Justin Herbert week for me in that situation. DK Metcalf, a player that, from a DFS perspective, we were both quite high on last week. He's been touchdown dependent, though, really. High of 12.3 fantasy points in week 1 was the only week without a touchdown. And since then, it's been kind of averaging around that as well. The Vikings are conceding the fewest points to wide receivers and the third fewest to quarterbacks. So expect a quiet passing day for Rodgers, which will then have a knock on to DK this week, I think. Right. Bear with me when I say some of the following names, because I'm not going to go full rash on as Edward. But Bijan Robinson, CMC, Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, all have matchups against top 5 defenses as far as fantasy points per game to running backs this week. Now, obviously, do not sit them. Absolutely not. It is a week where they may be a bit quieter, and maybe a week where you look towards your captain pick, towards maybe a wide receiver this year in fantasy game day. But it's that matchup is the reason why this week I would be sitting David Montgomery, not just because I'm annoyed, because he ran absolute tatters through the Ravens defense in week 3. The Browns have been solid against the run, allowing a league low 127 yards to running backs this season and a really impressive 2.2 yards per carry average. I just think this may prevent Monty, who's splitting his carries with Jahmyr Gibbs. Then Gibbs is far more elusive. Gibbs is far more dynamic. We know that. I think this is a week where Monty will not be the Monty we love to see, quite possibly. Travis Hunter, at this point, his target share is decreasing each week. He's been limited to just one catch for 21 yards last week. He hasn't topped 33 receiving yards in a game so far. Yet there still seems to be a solid core. I think about 20% of leagues when I looked yesterday where he was still started. That is surely just the off-season hype still following him at this stage. The 49ers he's got this week, defense are the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to receive this season. Don't be having him in your lineup this week. And then finally, a player that we have done nothing but praise through the season so far, Javon Johnson, faces the Bills this week, who have only allowed 5 receptions to tight ends through 3 games. Second fewest fantasy points, 4.2. And a defense I think really could kind of keep Spencer Rattler maybe a bit more of a challenge he's been used to so far. So Javon Johnson, a player we have had as a starter week 3 weeks in a row. This week I would probably steer away from if you can. What are your thoughts there, Ed? Any of the sits for you this week, or any of those you think I'm being too harsh on?
There's some very brave calls there. I think I'd find it very difficult to bench somebody who just rushed for 151 yards and scored 2 touchdowns in Monty. But I understand your reasoning. Travis Hunter is somebody who, there was obviously huge hype about him, and he's an elite player, but he's yet to kind of establish himself really, and maybe someone to keep on your bench. Certainly don't drop him yet, but he's not someone I'd start with any confidence at the moment.
Before we move on then, please do take a moment to subscribe, like, share as well. If you have enjoyed the show so far, we've got loads more coming your way. To a couple of days, we've got our Fantasy 5 show, giving you some streaming options for the week, and then our DFS show as well. But Ed, you're going to look ahead to the game of the week this week. And it is, everybody's favourite team against everybody's least favourite team, isn't it?
That's right. I'll let the viewers decide which falls into which category. We've got Ravens at the Chiefs. I've gone obvious. In the late slate on Sunday, a huge matchup between 2 of the AFC's big hitters. Both teams going to be desperate for a win as they currently sit 1-2. It is a bit too early to say it's a must-win, but there's no doubt that whoever loses has got a tough route to winning their division. Coming out of this game 1-3 isn't where you want to be. The Ravens got a poor recent record in this fixture. They've lost 6 of the last 7 matchups, although 4 of those defeats were one-score defeats. The Ravens' only win since 2012 was a 1-point victory in 2021. Basically, expect a tight game is what I'm saying, and hopefully a high-scoring game. But I'm not that convinced with the Chiefs at the moment whether it will be high-scoring. If we look at obvious starts for the Ravens, Lamar, obviously, he'll be feeling battered and bruised after his 7 sacks against the Lions, but he's still throwing the ball well. Also, despite a couple of quiet weeks, you're going to be starting Derrick Henry. I also, after last week, I think Mark Andrews is back in must-start territory. He was tight end 2 last week, and once he started to get going last year, he was undroppable. So he's a very safe option for Lamar. With the Chiefs, Mahomes, QB8 after week 3, about where you've drafted him, and you're playing him if you've got him in your squad. After that, I don't think there's anyone else in the Chiefs who I'd start with real confidence. When did we last say that about the Chiefs? Just one must start. But I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit harsh. I'll see what you think in a second. Maybe starts. I think Zay Flowers is back in this category. It was a bit bizarre, his low usage against the Lions. And as I say, it drops him back into that maybe start category. Maybe we were lulled into a false sense of security after 2 solid weeks to start the season. I think Bateman's a maybe start after a solid week. But the health warning with Bateman is he's been very inconsistent throughout his career. So it's tough to expect another big week from him. The Chiefs, Hunt could be a decent flex play, as could Hollywood and Tyquan Thornton, who've shared the receiving workload in the absence of Worthy and Rice. If Worthy is back from injury, you're probably going to start him, but not with much confidence. And I'd have to say that Kelsey is in the maybe start category at the moment. 10 receptions in 3 weeks is not the volume you're looking for, and you might well have a more appealing tight end option on the bench. And looking at sits, Justice Hill, he was involved in the receiving game against the Lions, but he's too risky to start. Keaton Mitchell, avoid. He was a healthy scratch. Likely is too much of a risk, even if he is back from injury. And D-Hop is way too risky for me also. There's a chance he could do nothing. And when it comes to the Chiefs, you're leaving Pacheco, Juju, Jalen Royals, Noah Gray well alone. They're unlikely to win you many matchups. What about you? If you anything you agree, disagree? Can you be objective when it comes to this game?
Yeah, Ravens going to absolutely smash the Chiefs.
Oh, okay.
No, do you know what? You're right. It's a game that whoever comes out of it 1-3 will look a lot worse off than they actually are after the start. But it feels tough to come back from, doesn't it? At that point, Henry, whoever is the first defensive player to make the Henry makes contact with on Sunday, I feel sorry for, because he's going to be waiting to destroy someone. After his week.
We spoke about this in the week. It's so harsh to call that a fumble, isn't it? That was just absolutely brilliant defensive play. But,
it was.
Henry was annoyed nonetheless, and I understand that.
Yeah. To me, stats wise, it goes down a fumble. A fumble to me is where you lose control for no reason. That was a good bit of defensive play. But he's still.
I'll ask some RJP Ryan.
We could do a whole bit on that. Bateman's interesting because he will go through. For me, Rashad Bateman is when the bye weeks really hit you and you're in a tough spot and you want a high risk, high reward player, or is when you take a gamble that it's a touchdown week when you put your DFS lineup together. I just think it's interesting when you look through the players that the Chiefs have got now, where you're saying Hunt could be decent, let's say Hollywood could be, Kelsey for different reasons is fading. It's just you're looking at a lot of players there that we've had really high hopes for at various different points. We've just not had it consistently, really. And then you look at the sits, and there's players there we know full well we are going to have to play in a few weeks when the bye weeks. There are going to be points where Justice Hill, you're gonna have to plug into a lineup somewhere. More like in Dynasty, where there's less on the waiver wire. So yeah, enjoy this week while you can, because I think next week is where the bye weeks hit, and hopefully when we look back at this on the review show, we'll be talking about a mighty Ravens demolition of the Kansas City Chiefs. Shall we move on though, Ed, to our favorite drop of the whole of the show?
Fantasy Fox, Hester versus Ed.
This is the point where we get competitive each week and we put a fantasy prop to each other for the week's slate and see who comes out on top. And so far, as you see on the screen, it's been me twice in a row, Edward, which means when we look back at week, our higher or lower, it was close. So last week, I gave you some different combinations of players that were matched up for various reasons, and you had to choose who would have the highest score. You were bang on with your pick that Amon-Ra St. Brown would outscore Malik Nabers, even though I put the tick in the wrong place on the screen. You had chosen TJ Hawkinson as being the highest scoring player out of Hawkinson and Mark Andrews. That's the only positive that came out of from the Ravens games, that Mark Andrews was set the world alight again. You went for Marvin Hampton over Henderson, comfortably so. You then went for Bijan to outscore CMC, and it was CMC that came out on top. And then the one that I'm most upset about, obviously, you went for Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry to easily outscore Cook and Allen. It just was not to be. So I came out 3-2 there and made it 2-2 overall. But it's your time to pitch a prop to me this week, Ed. And we have what we're billing as top 2 battles.
Indeed. So 3 weeks in, we've got our top 2s in each position. And I just want you to tell me, out of the top 2 in each position, who will have the better week 4. So, I mean, it's lovely. In the quarterback position, we have the top 2 drafted. Lamar versus Josh Allen. They're both 1 and 2. Lamar, obviously, we've spoken about. They've got the Chiefs this week. Josh Allen has the Saints. So a tasty matchup for Josh Allen. So are you going to get behind your man, or are you going to bottle it and actually say Josh Allen is going to destroy the Saints?
I am confident in this matchup that it's a Josh Allen week, but I would rather lose the point than turn my back on Lamar Jackson. So I'm going Lamar Jackson.
I love that. I love that. You're
I'm hedging my bets. So I'm hedging my bets that I can, if I get it wrong, I can still say I was right.
Okay, you love doing that. Somehow you're always right. Running backs again. Maybe not like neither of these are surprised. They're the top 2. JT, number 1, with 75 fantasy points. He has the Rams this week, so a tough matchup for the Colts. CMC, arguably an easier matchup against the Jags. So who is your running back of choice this week?
I think I'm going to go CMC. I've already said about that Rams defense. So yeah, definitely not a slight on Taylor. It's another confidence in the Rams defense. So I will pick CMC.
Good shout.
This will be the week he does this out with his calf injury, won't it?
Yeah, quite probably. I mean, interestingly, we're on to our 3rd position, and no real surprises as the top 2, you would argue. Puka, maybe a bit of surprise he's as high as number 1. I think he's drafted as wide receiver 5. He's number 1. We're 3 really consistent weeks. The Rams have the Colts, as we just established. Amon-Ra, tough matchup maybe against that brutal Browns defense. So Puka or Amon-Ra in week 4.
I generally think this is the toughest out of them, actually, for which way it's going to go. I think I'm going to go. I'm going to let the data guide me. Nacua has been consistent, so I'm going to go Nacua. Whereas we've always seen Amon-Ra can have monstrous games and sometimes not disappear, but this is sort of match where I think he might be quieter. Yeah, I'm going to go Puka Nacua.
Puka. Okay, so far we've got Lamar, CMC and Puka. Surprises here, maybe top 2 tight ends, certainly compared to the others. Jake Ferguson, tight end 1 for the Cowboys. They have Green Bay this week. Tough divisional matchup. And then Juwan Johnson, I mean, you spoke about him earlier as a potential sit candidate against the Bills. So does that mean you're Ferguson all the way?
This shows how many of the top fantasy players have got tricky matchups, doesn't it? 'Cause each one of these, it's come down to me looking at the defense rather than the actual offensive player. I think Ferguson is more volatile, isn't he? We do see him sometimes completely, obviously not so far because of where he's at. I'm going to have to stick with what I said earlier, though. If I'm going to say Juwan Johnson is a sit, I'm going to have to sit him here and go for Ferguson.
And last but not least, defenses if needed for the tie break. So the Vikings, who were quiet first couple of weeks, had that mega week against the Bengals, looked excellent on defense. Seahawks have been slightly more consistent, but again, they had a great week 3. Vikings have the Steelers this week, and the Seahawks have the Cardinals.
I'm going to go Seahawks. I've got no confidence in Kyler Murray's passing at the minute, and with Connor out, I think there's a bit more uncertainty there. So, and Seahawks, we highlighted one of the few consistent defense, aren't they, this season for fantasy as well?
They are.
So yeah, I will go Seahawks.
So Lamar, CMC, Puka, Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson.
No, Ferguson.
Ferguson, you stuck by your guns, and the Seahawks. We'll see how we get on next week. Hopefully, I can get a point back.
Hopefully so. We'll see if we can stick this out on social media as well. So get your picks in. Also, we now move on to Sunday Night Bet Club. And full disclosure, sometimes when we do Sunday Night Bet Club, I forget about it. It's a bit late, and then I can't be bothered to do a bet.
Lazy Mark.
However, that has the biggest payoff of my most consistent coining, because for some reason, when it comes to the following bets, I have incredible luck over the last 3 years. So my bet this week is Scorigami. So if you're not aware of what Scorigami is, it is basically where a combination of numbers come up and have not happened at any point previously, and that is then a Scorigami. So the last Scorigami we had was week 1 when the Bills beat the Ravens 41-40, because those combination score had never come up ever in an NFL fixture. Now, we have chosen Scorigami as our bet 4 times over the last 3 years of shows, and every single time it comes up. So I reckon this is the week. We're getting paid on Friday, Ed. Stick it all on Scorigami at odds of 15.00, and that'll bring you back some mega bucks. So have a look at Scorigami on X. We'll probably pop a little post out for that as well. It's a completely pointless thing that I find quite interesting, just looking at the data that comes out. So it's worth having a little look at. £10 returns £150, which means, Ed, that $10 returns you
$150.
Excellent maths. Well done.
Thanks.
Right. Final bit then. Let's move on to Thursday night football. And we were saying just before we started recording, this is the first Thursday night football game or Monday night football I'm not that bothered about.
No.
So, yeah, I'm not overly excited. So when I'm not overly excited, I look to try to find a statistic that I find interesting about it. So, Ed, interesting might be pushing it, but they've played each other 52 times so far in their histories, with the Cardinals winning 22 games and the Seahawks winning 29, and 1 tie thrown into the mix as well. So Seahawks are winning the Battle of the Birds. Seahawks giving up the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and 2nd fewest to wide receivers. So this is unlikely to be the Murray and Marv show. We are still waiting to see consistently. James Conner out, as already said, so Benson's role will be interesting to see. That's one, but I am interested to watch in this game. And I'm also interested to watch Jackson Smith and Jigba as well, to be fair. He's been more consistent this year, and if he passes 15 fantasy points this week, it'll be the first time he scored 15 plus on a 4-game streak in his career. So that'll be one thing that will be trouble, because I've got lots and lots of JSN in my fantasy rosters. Obvious starts. So for the Seahawks, Kenneth Walker has been back to back top 10 weeks, and with Arizona giving it 24.4 points to running backs, Walker seems like a locked-in pick at this stage. And JSN, as I've said, has been so consistent so far. Current wide receiver 5. After last year, you could never quite choose when to play JSN, could you? Whereas for me, is must start fair at this stage? Wide receiver 5 has got to be, hasn't he? Cardinals. Is anybody a must start for the Cardinals that's not called Trey McBride?
No.
No, there really are. So Trey McBride, yep, you're locking in. Maybe starts for the Cardinals. I think they're almost all in the maybe category because you just never know each week. So Murray yet to have a top 12 week for fantasy. Trey Benson expects to have a bigger workload, but DeMarcado, will he be more involved than we think? He could be the receiving back. Marvin Harrison is becoming a bit of an enigma for me, with only 10 receptions in his first 3 games. Marvin Harrison still feels like a player you are going to plug in, but he's also a player that you could well have an option on the bench you're happier with. Seahawks, Sam Darnold currently only started in 12% of leagues and is the QB 23 in fantasy. I say this with such glee because I kept waiting for the downfall last year and it never came from a fantasy point of view. I think we're seeing maybe it was that Minnesota offense and his skill set were just a perfect combination. But with QB injuries, he might be a necessity for you. Like we said with previous QBs, we spoke about as being sits. Cooper Kupp is too inconsistent to trust, but Arizona are giving it the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers, already said. So he could be flex worthy here. It just come with a very clear risk attached to that, though. Sits of the week, everyone else. I mentioned DeMarcado earlier. I just don't see him as being startable until we've seen what that role is. He might be a nice dart throw when it comes to looking at DFS lineups this week. Torrey Horton is getting some buzz after last week's 18.2 fantasy points and 11.2 the week before, with a touchdown in each week. I think is one to add to your roster if he's still available and you got space on the bench. But I think I'm going to have other options I'd rather start. I'm not quite sure I'd have the onions to stick him in my lineup this week. Another 10+ point week, though, maybe I will reconsider. Who am I being too harsh or too in on out of those this week, Ed? And are you looking forward to this more than I am as a matchup?
No. There are elements of it I'm looking forward to. Like you mentioned, JSN, it's exciting to see him establishing himself as a clear wide receiver 1. He's had overall close to 100 yards every week. He's very reliable going forward. And, the Cardinals running back situation is interesting in terms of, exactly how Trey Benson's going to fit in. I know there's a lot of people who've had him stashed on benches and are excited that he's going to get the game time, but it is a bit of a grey area this week. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully it'll be a decent game, but I'm not holding out much hope.
This shows that we spend months and months and months desperate to watch anything, and we're at week 4 and we're getting picky. This should have been week 1 Thursday night football, Ravens Bills this week instead. That's when it should have been.
Agreed.
Yeah, they can do all the planning with AI or the one we know better. That brings us to the end of the show, though, Ed. What are your highlights for week 4 that we've not mentioned? Anything in particular looking forward to this week?
I'm looking forward to the fact that the Bengals don't play until Monday night, so I can enjoy the slate on Sunday.
Absolutely. So we on that positivity that Ed has managed to find in the Bengals' misfortune, we'll be back in a couple of days with Fantasy 5, looking at some streaming options at quarterback, tight end, and defense. Spoiler alert, Ed probably won't be mentioning Jake Browning as a streamable QB option this week. Is that unlikely to say, Ed? Unless you want to be spiteful of people, I guess.
Maybe, I don't know.
And then on Saturday for our DFS show, giving you a breakdown with Fantasy Game Day of here in the UK and DraftKings values for our US audience. Amazing. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Ed, that's all I've got to say. Anything you would like to add?
No, I'll just call the taxi, shall I? Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.